Hello guys and welcome back to another Built Not Bought episode, or should I say Built Not Bought special episode. And I say special because on this episode we're going to be looking at a car that's not a four-wheel drive. Something I'm trying, something a bit different. And I want you guys to comment below whether you like it or not, whether you want to see more of this. Maybe I'll start another channel, maybe I'll put more on this channel. But basically my brother's building a HQ at the moment. So it's a 72, is it 72? 72 HQ, and it's had basically a complete ground up rebuild. And I was toying with the idea of filming it earlier, but then decided not to. It was a little project for him and it was something we could just work on without having to worry about cameras, but it's coming to the sort of exciting part now. So I thought I'd film a few bits and pieces here and there to sort of show you guys some of the other stuff that we get up to here at Built Not Bought. It's not really, it's just the Isles family. But basically I'm gonna pass you over to Zach so he can tell you a bit about what he's done on it so far. And pretty much today we're gonna look at doing some of the wiring on it. I was meant to show the motor going in, but they did that last night without me here, but literally it takes 2 seconds to drop that in. So there's some photos of that happening. And then it's really, by Friday this week, we want to get the thing running. So it's really just wiring up the essential things, getting the fuel and oil into it, and see if we can get it fired up. So that's the plan for this episode. Sam from Built Not Bought.
I've had this car for about 3 years, so it's been quite a long project. I used to have a HZ when I very first got my license, and I absolutely loved it. And then yeah, about 3 years ago, one of Dad's mates mentioned that he was trying to sell a tonner, and Dad let me know, and I was kind of thinking, you know, probably wasn't ready for it or wasn't exactly looking for it, but I thought I'll go have a look and see what it's all about. Saw the car and saw how much he was asking for it, and it pretty much sold me on the spot. I said, you know, it was good value for money, and I did want to get one again eventually. So that's sort of how it came about. It has pretty much been ground up. I've used mostly the original parts, just refurbished them, repainted them, and a couple of sort of more modern mods just to make it more drivable and a bit more comfortable. Keeping with the original motor, so it's a 308. One thing we have changed is the gearbox. So it had a Aussie 4-speed. We've changed that to a Super 5-speed. They're quite a common gearbox to bolt up to these 308s. There's a lot of adapters available for them. Today we're going to start looking at the wiring. So we got the motor in last night. So we'll look at wiring that up. Run the fuel lines this morning, so just need to plumb them in, drop the fuel tank in. That should be about it, just fire it up, and then obviously later on we'll get everything tidied up and done properly. I just really want to get it started.
Alright, so that's a bit of an overview obviously of what's happened with this and the stage that we're at. Now if you're on my Instagram, I've done a few posts here and there, and a recent thing a lot of people were curious about is the wiring harness in it. Wiring harness, did I say that wrong? What was it called again, a quick connect?
Quick wire.
So quick wire, now this was from America and it got sent over, and it's basically a standalone harness. They use them in a lot of hot rods and Camaros over there and bits and pieces, people building old school cars, and now it really suited what we were doing here because basically every piece of wiring on here actually has a label on it. Like it tells you it's for the alternator, the fuel pump, headlights left, headlights right. So everything that's labeled, you can see where it's meant to go, and you can either cut out what you don't need or run to where you need it to go depending on what it says on there. So it's made it very easy, very painless installation. It's the same kit that I used on an XP that I built not too long ago. So I'm really going to be concentrating on that today to get it all wired up. Because we're only starting for the first time, we don't necessarily need to hook everything up, so we can run it without the water for like a very short amount of time. So we're really going to be concentrating on getting fuel into it, getting oil into it, and making sure we've got oil pressure, and any of the pumps attached to it, like power steering and that, either take those belts off or put the fluid in them. And you can probably even start it with some start your bastard or some brake cleaner just to get the thing running, and then try and get that fuel into it. So it's gonna start, but it's not gonna be like running yet. We may or may not have the exhaust on there as well. So it's kind of just doing it the cheat way to make sure that it runs and it all turns over okay. But after that, we can really just finish everything off and get it driving. Alright, so we've sorted out the wires in the engine, we've got the signals hooked up, sorted out where the alternator's going, all that blah, blah, blah. I've come underneath now because the next thing we need to do is the starter motor. Now I read in the wiring harness book and it looks like there's this fat red cable which goes to the starter battery side, but there's also a fat battery cable that goes to your battery. So I think this is the one that triggers the whole fuse panel. So I'm going to connect that to the starter motor to basically fire up that whole fuse panel. On the other side here, they call it the neutral safety switch, but this is basically your starter motor trigger, but it goes through your either on automatics from the gearbox, could possibly be a clutch trigger, or let's say, is there one on this gearbox? Yeah, there's a couple of wires here. So when it's in gear, it won't let it start. So the starter signal from your key goes into your gearbox, into this purple wire, then to your starter, so you can't start it in gear. So both of these are going to hook up to the starter motor, and then we can hook up a battery to that and then see how else everything is powered up. So what are these new gauges you got? You've gone with, what are they? Pro Sport. So Pro Sport gauges, which are, they're all electronic, okay?
Yep.
So everything's electronic, like speedo, RPM, that, which we've got a converter for. So that normally comes off your distributor or a spark plug lead. But because it's a digital RPM gauge, they're designed for ECUs, which run off a 5-volt square wave. Is it square wave?
Square wave,
yeah, square wave pulse. So we've got a converter which converts your distributor plug, spark plug pulse to a 5-volt square wave so that the RPM can read it. So we're going to experiment with that, hope that it works. Everything else, oil pressure, water temp, we're supplied with the sensors, and the senders are in here.
These two are slightly different. They're like the more up-spec Evo gauges. So they've got white, blue, green, and red. These are just standard ones that only have red and blue. So it's been about 2 days. So what we've done since then is just finished plumbing up all the fuel lines. We've serviced the carby, checked all the jets and wrote down all the sizes of them, so when we do want to tune it we can have a base level to go off. A bit more of the wiring's been done, so we've got ignition, starter motor's running with the key now. We've finished, put the coil back on, so the motor turns over now, but we're still not quite ready to fire it up. Fuel tank's in, and that's probably about it since we last spoke.
All right, so I've been left inside for a while sorting out all this wiring. So I used a multimeter to figure out where the pins work on the key, because it's basically like a mechanical kind of key. As the shifter moves, it physically clicks together different contacts within that column, and that's what makes the start, ignition, accessory, everything work. So I got that sorted, that's all wired up. What we're doing today, because today's Friday, I said earlier that we wanted to get it running on Friday. Now, because it's a fresh engine, it's not a roller cam, is it? It's a flat tapper cam, is it? Yeah, so it's not a hydraulic roller cam, I don't think, in this thing. So when we run it, you actually need to bed the cam in, which means you've got to get the RPM up to around sort of 2000, get the fluids flowing, get the oil up there, and leave it running for a bit. Now, because of that, we have to hook up all the water system because it's going to get hot. You can normally just start these things without water in them, see if they fire, blah, blah, blah. But with these older style motors, you've got to bed them in a little bit. So today, radiator's going in, getting all the fluids in it. Also got to put oil in it as well. The fuel system's been done, obviously, as Zach said earlier. And then hopefully this afternoon, sticking to our theme of Friday, we'll get this thing fired up and try and bed that cam in, and hopefully it runs all fine. I don't think there's an exhaust on it at the moment, but that's okay. It's going to sound good, isn't it? Dad's home, so I'm going to pass the camera and mic over to him to kind of run you and Zach through what happens with these old school distributor type motors, where you can set the timing statically, and then once the thing's running, obviously we're looking at bedding that cam in, getting the revs up for that, and then looking at the dynamic timing and just tweaking that, because you got things like vacuum advance, you get it done for idle and then you go up, and then you obviously got to tune carburetors and stuff like that. So you got to get the thing running first, and then it's tweaking all those little bits and pieces. So we'll get on to looking at that.
So first time to fire this thing, we've got to go through getting fuel up to it, oil into it, and spark, and do all the timing. So we've just put some oil into the sump. So I've just taken the filter off here, which sits on an angle, and I'm going to use a pump and pump oil straight down the gallery, straight into the gears on the actual oil pump. So when it fires, she's already got oil in the gears, and we should get oil pressure straight up. Oop. What the hell?
You put it on the wrong side.
I just picked it out of the cupboard.
Not my beautiful paint job.
So another thing I'll bring your attention to is, because this is a hydraulic cam, it's not a roller cam, a trap for young players, but I like to use this Penrite with full zinc for the lubrication for bedding in the cam, so when we run it up. So a lot of these new synthetic stuff you use, you can destroy your lifters on startup. So we're using a full zinc.
Just taking the plugs out so we don't have spark, because we don't actually want the motor to fire just yet. Just want to turn it over so we can build up oil pressure. And there's also less resistance on the starter motor, so it spins faster.
I put a timing light, not a timing light, a test light in there. With the points closed, the light will be on, and we'll rotate. Once it's sitting on top dead center, we'll rotate the distributor till the light just goes out and the points are just starting to open. So that's when it'll fire. Another little thing we do before we fire it up, obviously it's got to suck the fuel up from the fuel tank and up into the pump. Because it's mechanical, this one, it's not an electric pump. We need it to running to crank it up. So we're just going to fill the bowl up on the carburetor with fuel.
Hopefully I made the bleeds properly.
I've just got to
Yeah,
check.
that's a good idea.
Check it. Yes. So we'll give it a crank, and you can tell when it's coming up on the compression stroke. There you go. So we're going to bring that round top dead center and check that the dizzy is pointing in the rotor on number 1, which it is. And now we know it's not, number 1's going to fire there, the rotor's pointing at number 1 on the compression stroke. Otherwise you can be 180 degrees out and she won't run. Battery's flat. Battery's flat.
Alright, so we've been cranking too long and battery's going flat. So we've got this super cheap auto jump starter. It's one of the only ones that you can get that are big enough to turn over a V8. So we'll chuck this on and hopefully get a bit more power for turning it over.
Alright. Don't fire, sorry, there's something wrong with that spark. No spark. That would have fired.
Been cranking it over. We've got no spark, so we've checked that the dizzy is earthing and everything, and the coil is working. Now we're just checking continuity on the leads to make sure that they are working, because I made them. So chances are they're probably not great.
We don't have any continuity, so his leads he's made, he hasn't made them right.
Maybe.
That's why we've got no spark.
I think the issue was that the plug running to the coil wasn't the right length. It wasn't touching, so that's obviously why we weren't getting spark. So we've got a longer adapter here that I'm trying to put on and torque at the same time.
and hopefully that will solve our problems.
Spark. We have spark.
Well, hooly dooly, that was a big around. All right, it's been a few days. It's Friday, but the week later. So we definitely didn't make that Friday deadline, but here's what happened. The spark plug leads, turns out they were fine. They were okay. We checked all the spark and everything. There was a little problem with the ignition coil. For some reason, the one little issue with that wiring harness is when you turn the key to ignition, the coil had power, but when you started it, it seems to cut the ignition, which is kind of weird. So we had to hotwire the coil pack and that gave it spark. But then we found another issue. So Zach ended up going away for a few days over Christmas. Now Dad and I managed to sort this out. What happened basically was the cam and crank was indeed out of alignment. Now this is really strange. It's very different to any small block Chevy, 350, 351 Ford, anything like that. You don't line up the timing marks with the dots, which is what you'd normally do. Because so basically what happens with these 308s, there's a mark on the crank, on the gear, and then you line it up, so weird. You spin it to top dead center, but not on the compression stroke, and then you measure 9 links or 16 connectors on the timing chain between the dot on the crank and a dot on the timing gear. Super weird, I don't know, I'll take a photo and show it to you, but like who would know how to do that? It makes sense to line up the 2 dots on the gears, but turns out with these 308s, the old Holdens, they have this stupid way of doing it. So then when we rotated it on the compression stroke, the valves were rocking correctly, because basically what was happening is the valves were slightly open when it was at top dead center. So obviously that's why it wasn't running before. So that's all sorted now. We've got the timing of the cam sorted. We've got the timing of the crank. We've got the ignition sorted. So now it should start. So Zach's gonna be home soon. And we're gonna see if we can fire this thing up. It is Christmas Day, so we'll just fire it up, a bit of a treat for us. And hopefully it'll just run. And then after that, we'll come back the next day and sort out how we do the timing. We've done static timing, obviously, with the distributor, but now we're gonna do the dynamic timing and get the thing running right, get the degrees, advanced right, tune up the carburetor for idle, for acceleration, the secondaries, vacuum, blah, blah, blah. So I'll get Dad to run through all that. But right now, we're gonna fire this thing up.
Come on. Yeah, that was 50 PSI. So is that about right?
Yep.
Well, that was easy. Straight up, first time.
Woo! That's how it should be, just timing. All right, we quickly fired it, so it'll run by turning the key. So now we're just going to set the timing, statically set it. So now I'm going to use a timing light. We've marked a couple of white spots on there at 6 degrees, and we'll just idle it and check it, and you just rotate the distributor to advance and retard it, and then lock it down, and we should be all good. After that, we've just got to set up the idle mixture with the jets on each side here of the carby. But well, again, we'll probably wait till I've driven the car and got some load on it and bed all the rings in, and it'll be all right to leave it idling for a while. But yeah, it's all looking good.
All right guys, so that has been the first ever video on one of these old school cars, something different, something not a 4-drive. So I want you to comment down below whether you like this style of video or not, or do I just put it in the bin and stick to the 4-drives? You let me know. If you enjoyed this video as much as me making it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and let me know what you liked about the video and what you want to see next. Otherwise, after this clip will be a link to some other videos from last episode, as well as a link to our website where there's a whole bunch of merchandise there. Grab a singlet, a hoodie, that's a large part of my income, which keeps me being able to do these videos, so I'd appreciate it if you go check that out. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next episode. Build Not Bought. Take it easy. Please click the button to your left if you want to go and check out the latest merchandise we have on our website. If you missed last week's episode, click down below to see it, and most importantly, on the far left, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.